One brutal winter morning in Montana, during what felt like the coldest spell in American history, Ryan Miller woke up with a jolt. He glanced at the thermometer hanging on his porch, his breath catching. It read a staggering 54 degrees below zero. The air outside wasn't just cold. It was vicious, freezing. The kind of punishing cold that turned every blade of grass and tiny leaf into a glittering sheath of ice, frozen in an eternal crystalline moment. Ryan, a lifelong Montanan, thought he was hardened to the cold. But this was different. A deep, uncontrollable shiver ran down his spine. It was the most brutal temperature he had ever witnessed. He moved mechanically, pouring himself a steaming mug of coffee, seeking some warmth. He turned on the TV to catch a weather update, but the howling wind outside, a mournful, relentless sound, snatched his attention. Standing mesmerized by the large picture window, he stared out. The wind wasn't just blowing snow, it was sculpting it. Thick layers were whipped into swirling towers, white columns that danced and twisted across the landscape like ghostly figures in some wild, stormy ballet. It was terrifyingly beautiful. But then, something happened that made his blood run colder than the air outside. Just when he thought this surreal morning couldn't get any stranger, he gasped. His coffee cup slipped from his hand, shattering. On the floor, the hot liquid splattering and instantly forgotten. Because through the thick frosted glass, he saw something that felt utterly impossible. A scene so wildly improbable, it bordered on a fever dream. Crouched against the window frame, her golden brown fur dusted with frost, was a mother bobcat. Her sleek, powerful body trembled visibly from the absolutely brutal cold, and she wasn't alone. Behind her, barely distinguishable against the blinding snow, were 3 tiny bobcat cubs. Little mounds of shivering, snow-dusted fur. Their frail bodies shook violently, fragile against the elements. Their pitiful mewing was almost entirely swallowed by the relentless howl of the wind. Then, heart-stoppingly, the smallest cub suddenly collapsed. Its tiny body lay twitching weakly in the snow, teetering on the brink of surrender to the merciless cold. But then, something extraordinary happened. As if sensing the urgency, the mother bobcat moved. She gently picked up the smallest cub by the scruff of its neck and brought it right to the window. Her every motion deliberate, fiercely purposeful, and yet so gentle. Her entire being radiated a mother's primal determination. She pressed the tiny, trembling body softly against the frigid glass, her breath instantly fogging the pain. Then she looked up directly at Ryan. Her amber eyes, radiant and burning with desperate raw hope, locked onto his. They pleaded with him. A silent cry for help that pierced straight to his soul. Outside, the wind screamed louder, slamming handfuls of snowflakes against the window with sharp, violent pops, echoing the desperation of the moment. Ryan stood frozen, his heart hammered like a trapped bird in his chest. He had never witnessed anything like this. Then the mother bobcat lifted a paw. With calculated care, she tapped it against the glass. Click, click, click. It wasn't random. It was intentional, a primal message, a plea for him to understand. He hesitated. Bringing wild animals, apex predators into his home was the last thing he'd ever considered. Fear clawed at him, but then he looked at the twitching cub, at the mother's eyes. He knew with chilling certainty, if he didn't act now, that little life wouldn't last much longer. His legs shook, but he forced himself toward the door. His mind spun with fear and uncertainty. He reached for the handle, opened the door just a crack, and then, astonishment. The mother bobcat didn't flinch. She didn't bolt. Instead, she stepped forward, setting the weak cub gently at the threshold. Then she stepped back deliberately, showing she wasn't a threat. Her amber eyes stayed locked on his, still full of desperate hope. Ryan knelt, heart pounding, and carefully scooped up the cub. It felt heartbreakingly light, barely warmer than the air outside. He carried it into the warmth. The mother never looked away. She watched every move. Then her gaze shifted toward the 2 remaining cubs, still huddled and shivering in the snow. She looked back at Ryan. Her silent, pleading look said it all. There are others. My babies. His fear melted under a wave of empathy. This time, he didn't hesitate. He opened the door wider and motioned for her to bring them, and she did. With the same careful, deliberate movement, she nudged the second cub, then the third, toward the door. When all 3 cubs were inside, awkwardly settled on the floor, Ryan paused. The mother bobcat stood at the threshold. The wind screamed around her. Snow swirled violently against her fur. She waited, asking silently for permission to enter. Ryan looked at her magnificent ice-dusted form, saw the vulnerability in her eyes, and finally stepped back, inviting her in. She moved with astonishing grace and visible caution. Just inside, she gave a quick shake, shedding a shower of ice crystals from her fur before stepping fully into the warmth. And then, the truly incredible part, she didn't rush in like a panicked wild animal. Not at all. She stayed near her cubs, every movement measured and respectful. She brushed lightly against a piece of furniture, tentatively, as if testing the boundaries of this strange new world. Ryan, still reeling from the unreality of it all, acted quickly. He gathered every blanket he could find, layering them near the roaring fireplace, building a warm nest. The mother wasted no time. With soft nudges, she guided her cubs toward the fire, adjusting the blankets with her paws and nose until her babies were snug and safe. Then something profound happened. She looked at Ryan again. Her amber eyes now shimmered, not with desperation but with something deeper. Gratitude, pure and unmistakable. That look pierced his soul. A warmth blossomed in his chest. A connection to this wild creature that defied explanation. Outside, the storm continued its furious assault. The wind howled like wolves on the hunt. But inside, within these walls, the atmosphere began to shift. A fragile, precious peace began to take root. The cubs, moments ago trembling and weak, slowly began to stir. The smallest one, nestled closest to the fire, let out a tiny, pitiful mibipo, the first sound since they arrived. So faint, yet it filled the room with overwhelming hope. Ryan watched in awe as the mother leaned down and began to lick each of her cubs in turn. Her rough tongue warming them, coaxing life back into their small forms. And somehow, despite their wildness, the cubs remained astonishingly calm. They huddled close to their mother, their wide eyes occasionally glancing at Ryan, but completely free of fear, as if they somehow knew they were safe, as if they trusted him. Time seemed to stretch and blur. Ryan sat, simply watching the incredible scene unfold. The firelight flickered across the bobcat's fur, casting a golden glow that stood in stark contrast to the icy chaos outside. Every movement of the mother was tender, deliberate, her instincts honed by nature, her focus entirely on her young. The smallest cub, now visibly stronger, let out another soft sound, this one firmer, braver, as it curled deeper into the warmth. Ryan couldn't look away. He felt humbled, like he was witnessing something sacred. The storm still raged beyond, his walls wild and unforgiving, but inside a fragile truce, a bond was forming. The mother bobcat looked at Ryan again, her gaze lingering. It was a look that said everything, a look full of gratitude no human words could ever capture. Ryan, still clutching the empty, forgotten coffee mug in his hand, felt a sudden, unexpected lump rise in his throat. How could a creature so inherently wild, so fiercely independent, display such astonishing gentleness, such profound understanding, such trust? The thought left him breathless, utterly humbled. In that powerful moment, he knew with absolute certainty just how extraordinary, how miraculous this encounter truly was. As the long hours of the storm slowly ground by, Ryan remained utterly mesmerized by the scene. The mother bobcat, ever vigilant, kept one eye on her precious cubs and the other on him. Her entire demeanor conveyed a sense of hard-won trust, but beneath that, an unyielding, fierce protection. And then it became even more incredible. At one point she stood up, stretching gracefully, and walked slowly, deliberately, toward the high kitchen. She stopped just at the edge of the counter, then turned back to look at him, ears slightly perked, almost as if she were politely asking for permission. Ryan, his mind racing to understand her silent request, instinctively grabbed a hay plate and placed a small piece of leftover cooked chicken on it. He carefully set it on the floor near her. She approached cautiously, sniffing the offering. Then, with that same defining, deliberate care, she picked it up and carried it back to the nest, meticulously dividing it amongst her hungry cubs. The storm outside showed absolutely no sign of relenting. Snow piled high against the windows, burying them in white. The wind continued its relentless, beastly howl, clawing at the very foundation of the house. But inside, the radiant warmth from the fireplace and the utterly unusual bond forming between man and beast created an atmosphere that felt profoundly surreal, almost magical. The flickering firelight seemed to weave a soft spell over the room, blurring the harsh edges of reality. And as the hours wore on, Ryan realized something that settled deep in his gut. By opening his door, by helping this Bobcat family, he had taken on a responsibility far greater than he had ever anticipated. The raw, brutal fragility of life in the wild, especially in conditions like these, was suddenly terrifyingly real. He couldn't just let them back out into that raging monster of a storm. They needed time, safety, and warmth to recover. And impossibly, he was their only hope. Over the next few hours, the mother Bobcat's behavior continued to astonish him. She was incredibly careful not to damage anything in the home, even using her paw to gently nudge a fallen blanket back onto the nest pile. The cubs, now warmer and more energetic, began tentatively exploring their surroundings. And here's the truly wild part. They didn't act like typical wild animals. They seemed to understand the boundaries of the space. They stayed close to the comforting heat of the fireplace, carefully avoiding furniture, never climbing or scratching. Their tiny paws patted softly against the wooden floor, their movements cautious but full of innocent curiosity, as if they too understood the sanctity of this fragile haven. Ryan simply couldn't believe what he was witnessing. The intelligence, the awareness, the sheer presence of the mother Bobcat was unlike anything he had ever encountered. She even seemed to communicate with him subtly through her body language. A tilt of her head, a flick of her tail, a lingering gaze. At one point, she turned to look at the smallest cub, who lagged slightly behind its more energetic siblings. With a soft rumbling growl, more like a murmur, she gently nudged it back. Toward the blankets, her fierce maternal instinct radiating from every movement. Finally, mercifully, the storm began to weaken. The wind quieted. The snow ceased its relentless assault. The mother Bobcat sensed the change and slowly stood, stretching her powerful body. A clear signal. It was time. She nudged each cub tenderly, encouraging them toward the door. Ryan walked over, heart heavy with both sadness and understanding, and opened it slowly. The brutal cold air surged in, making him shiver after hours in the warmth. The cubs hesitated, tiny wild things, suddenly reluctant to leave their safe haven. Their small paws sank into the snow. Their uncertain cries were nearly lost in the wind, but the mother was patient and steady. With gentle nudges, she reminded them of their wild home. And then came the moment that would be etched into Ryan's memory forever. Before she stepped out into the snow herself, the mother Bobcat turned back. She looked directly at Ryan. Then, with stunning deliberation, she reached out a paw and placed it softly on his arm. The touch was brief, fleeting, but electric, a powerful, silent moment of connection that utterly transcended species. Her eyes, filled with that extraordinary gratitude, seemed to convey a heartfelt thank you deeper than words could ever express. Then, as quietly as they had arrived, the family of bobcats disappeared into the forest, their beautiful forms melting into the snowy white landscape. Ryan stood in the open doorway, letting the cold sting his face, watching until the last trace of them vanished. The silence that followed felt heavy, but not empty. The warmth they had brought, the fragile, incredible sense of life and connection, lingered long after they were gone. He was left with a deep, newfound appreciation for the intelligence, the emotion, the will of the wild, creatures he had always admired, but only from afar. This encounter, this impossible morning, would stay with him forever. A story etched into his soul. It wasn't just a story of survival against the odds. It was something far more profound. An extraordinary, breathtaking connection forged in the heart of a brutal Montana winter. A valuable lesson. This experience taught Ryan something powerful. That compassion knows no boundaries, not even between species. That even in the harshest, most unforgiving circumstances, bonds can form. And that the wild world holds depths of emotion and trust that we are only beginning to understand. What an unbelievable story, right? Had you ever heard of anything like this? Let me know your thoughts and feelings in the comments below. If this story touched your heart, please give it a rating. Maybe a 10 out of 10 by hitting that like button. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss more amazing stories like this one.